Good evening, everyone. It's just, I think, just over 3 weeks ago, and I was getting nervous. I thought, what are we going to do for November? And fortunately, Dean Giavaris here at Shure, who works in our studio and our theater here, said, Ken, I got an option for you. Why don't you meet this guy and see if it makes sense to have him present? I said, please, timing would be great. So I was able to meet Fred here in short notice, and we sat down and got a sense of, and I hadn't had a chance to even prepare to do a lookup on him and do a background check and all that. And sure enough, he's, as I understand, and after meeting and talking with him, he's, I think, more passionate and more excited right now about doing audio and all the work he's doing. I can't imagine 40 plus years ago maybe how you may have been in really getting into the business and doing all that you've done. And so I saw right away that it was going to be a great chance for us to get some background, some experience, and learn from him of what he has experienced and encountered. And I asked him to try to be a bit more on the technical, you know, the equipment, the gear, the studios, the places, give us some insight to that. And he says, I can do that. And I said, and then he's been actively doing recordings, and he's had some recent experience working with some of the Shure microphones and some of our ribbon microphones. And I said, that's good. Don't make it a sales job. We're not talking about selling our product. We'll just tell us more about the technical and the gear. And he said, I can do that. So I said, good. How about end of November? And he said, I can do that. And I said, all right, that sounds good. So as you then saw, we got the meeting notice out to everyone and lickety-split time. And I'm glad you're able to make it out on this warm winter evening and have a chance. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce Fred Breitberg. Thank you.
How do you do, everyone? I'm Freddie Breitberg. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak in front of you today. Yes, I have a 40-year plus experience doing recording. Oddly enough, from a talk and tech standpoint, I'm a pretty non-technical guy. I wasn't a math guy. I wasn't a physics guy that way. I understood it all, but I wasn't, you know, a book guy in that respect. But when I found audio, I found a place where I could apply what I did know about things and work with, you know, in an idiom where technology and art rubber meet the road. I guess I wanted to start by saying, you know, they had a hi-fi at my house. It was a mono console monstrosity, probably 12 watts, who knew? But I did know that when they weren't home, I could really crank the thing and it would get pretty loud. They had a subscription to the Columbia Record Club. So the records that were coming in were all big band, Broadway show, light opera, pop stuff. So I was exposed to all that at an early age, and of course, you know, when I had a job, and so, you know, I would buy records, and when they weren't home, I would play those records, and I would buy the Beach Boys, and you know what, it was ever popular at that time. Additionally, you know, I recall even, you know, when I was younger than that, spinning records at the social center, you know, so I've always sort of had an inclination and been a hi-fi kind of guy. And through high school, you know, I became a jazz buff lover, and hi-fi went hand in hand. And when I got into college, I was taking judo, and I found that the place we took judo in was also where they had the radio station. So I got a job at the radio station. I, you know, was a jazz DJ, as many shifts as I could get, because, you know, I wasn't really that interested in studying. And little by little, I found my way into the control room. And so I began to run the control room for other DJs and also run the control room for my own show, so that, you know, I mean, it was just, I sort of gravitated naturally to it. One day I left a speaker on and I discovered echo. because it was the tape recorder that I was making the tape on was in playback, and it was at 3 3/4, so it was a juicy echo, nice and long. And I recall being intrigued by that. And then when I got out of college, I was sort of knocking around at one thing or another, but I found my way into a job at a recording studio as an apprentice, and that studio was called Audio Finishers. Audio Finishers was at that time run by the two top guys who had been the biggest draw from Universal Recording, and they had broken away and started this operation, and it was very successful. It was about 2 years in by the time I got there. And I apprenticed there and learned the commerce art of recording. Back then, we did commercials, pretty much was what paid your bills. And in the model that still exists today, commercials are still what pays the bills. It was at night we would do records and, the odd film score or what have you, but, commercials are what really paid the bills. At Audio Finishers, golly, I got there in October of '69. They had just gotten the 16-track that week, too. So 16-track was a brand new technology. There was 8-track, there was 12-track, but 16-track was what was happening, and it was sort of the beginning of production, not post-production per se, but the ability to record things in multiple stages so that you had control. And in the commercial world, people changed their minds, so you'd want to fix things. And this enabled you to help fix things. But in a live recording sense, it also enabled you to separate where you could and come back later and concentrate on your mixes. The board they had there was an Electrodyne. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it was an interesting console. And it had 2-band EQs. It was a good starting place. They had an MM1000 tape recorder. This was a tape recorder that, this was before they had auto input, so you couldn't really punch in unless you could manipulate the control that switched it from repro or sync repro to input. So once I discovered that, then I was pretty much the tape op from there. And so I operated tape, I set up studios, I learned how to do all the functions of recording from guys that were the pros of that era. I assisted for Murray Allen. I know many of you know who he was. I was an assistant for Bruce Swedien for about a year plus. 2 or 3 other guys that were probably just about as good as Bruce that you might never have heard of. I was exposed to a fellow named Malcolm Chisholm. I don't know if you know Malcolm. Malcolm was a fellow who worked for Bill Putnam here in Chicago and out west when Bill Putnam went and opened United and Western. And then Malcolm came back and worked at Chess 2 or 3 times and for Paragon. And, he was another great influence in my world. And probably was the primary guy that turned me on to what, why, and how you use ribbon mics for. So back then, of course, a 16-track console was a big console. 16 mics were a lot of mics. A lot of boards were still 8 mics, and you just used fewer mics in more distance, and you covered more stuff with less components. So as they got into 16, and then 24-track came about, so the boards became 24 mics worth, and you could really toss a greater number of mics at the different sections. Economically, it became, easier to throw a lot of mics at fewer musicians as the musicians got, smaller and smaller. When I first got in the business, a typical beer commercial was a 40-musician commercial, consisting of a big rhythm section, big band horn component, and maybe 30 strings. And if there was vocals, they could have 8 vocalists going, and it would all go at once. So, with 16 mics, that was at the time big technology, and you had a lot of choices. But with 12 and 8 mics, you had fewer choices. You had to back the mics up and all that stuff. So so economics caused the musicians to get fewer, fewer and fewer. The 30-piece string section became a 20-piece, then a 16-piece, and then they would double that to give you the semblance of a bigger section. Horns were harder to double because they, sort of phase or flange sounded. And so in some pop cases, that was the sound that they wanted. But for commercials and big band and the like, it was a single horn pass is pretty much what you were going to wind up doing. Additionally, they had they had fewer FET mics back then. They had more tube condensers. But the mic complement was pretty much a number of tube condensers, 5 or 6 ribbons, and the 57 was a new mic in '69, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure it had just come out in '69 because we got a boatload of them over at Universal, and one fella actually did a charted record on all 57s. So let's see, what else did I want to talk about? The tape recorders, auto input, the compression limiters. People look at like the 1176 and the 176, these are coveted Fairchilds, that kind of thing. When I got there, they weren't using that stuff. They were using 1176s, but nobody wanted to use a 176 anymore or any of this other stuff. And it's funny how things have gone full circle, especially with regard to the digital emulations of these kinds of compression and EQ and the like. But back then it was the authentic equipment, and everybody had an opinion, and so I had a wide range of input from one and all. But I graduated from assisting to first chairs, not real quickly, but fairly quick, because I realized if you could sell the time, then you could do the session. And so I was busy selling time wherever I could and working at night however I could and assisting during the day. And I was doing some, 18, 20-hour days for some time. But the work was amazing. It was just an amazing amount of work back then. So it helped a lot in terms of giving me the amount of reps that, I have. And let's face it, it's just like athletics in that regard. Reps are important to how well one does. So at Audio Finishers, the acoustics were very interesting. It was a little graystone building, so they had a big living room. You couldn't tell because it was empty, but it was a big living room, and they sprayed it with asbestos. Yeah. And they did a couple studios like that in town. They actually redid Studio B at Universal that way. I get a little ahead of myself in that story, but yeah, it was sprayed asbestos. The room was really dead, and you got great separation, but no harmonics. So it was a interesting sounding room, just very dead and didn't have a lot of transient response, but the clients loved it because the work went fast and it sounded good on the air, and they were happy with that. About 6 months into my employment there, the two fellows went back to Universal and made a deal with the owner to lease with an option to buy the facility. And so they went back to Universal, and I went with them and became an assistant there, where Universal A was a big, live, beautiful studio, and my entire concept of what acoustics were about and were for did a complete 180, because, we had this dead, very muffly sounding room, and now I was in an actual environment, and a famous environment. I mean, great records had been done in this studio of jazz and R&B and pop, and it was great to get there. They left that studio's acoustics the way they were. They redid Studio B with this asbestos treatment, and I went on my merry way. They also put one of these Electrodyne consoles in the B room. But in the A room, they had a custom Bill Putnam console. So this was a Uri, in effect, and it was Uri Mike Pre's two-band Uri EQ on every track. And this two-band EQ, as you cranked it, the curve got more severe. So, it wasn't like a linear curve as you cranked amplitude. It became logarithmic as it got greater. So you couldn't really overcrank these things. And this is sort of why, well, there's two reasons why you want to process into tape. One was that, so you wouldn't have to try to get all the EQ at once. And the other reason was, when you process the tape, pretty much whatever noise, et cetera, is going, with your processing is going to tape. But when you process that same thing off, you're also dealing with tape hiss. And you're processing that and amplifying that off as well. It is actually one reason why I don't miss analog, and I'm kind of happy with the digital experience. The other part of that, is as amps and preamps and now no tape and et cetera has gotten quieter and quieter, this has begun to expose the noise factors in the microphones, which is the very first stage. And so I'll talk about that a little later. But the point is, back then, noisy mics or not, by the time you went through it, and in '69 there were still two preamps around, which are really good sounding. And were better than the transistor preamps of that time. Although everybody kind of willy-nilly went to the transistor world, the best transistor boards at that time were Neves, but there were very few Neves in town. So, we had a colored kind of a askance viewpoint of what transistors were until the better transistor boards hit town. I think the first transistor boards that hit were pretty much those black and red MCIs. I don't recall their number, but they had unusual phase characteristics in addition to the low headroom. But if you customized that board, it was a pretty good board. I know for sure that they customized a board like that in Philadelphia where they cranked out all those Gamble and Huff hits. And so, but at that time, I had, I left Audio Finishers and went to Universal. They eventually closed that satellite facility. And I worked at Universal for about 3 years, and then I had an opportunity to, during that time I was exposed to a bunch of location recording. And this was location recording in churches, big Catholic stone churches. And we were doing Christmas carol albums, high school Christmas carol albums. So some of these choirs were 80 voices, and some of these choirs were 400. And we would go out there with 4 mics. We would use 2 77s up in the front of the choir, like on the stage right here, and then 2 in the back, and we would gauge the distance and reverb. I had a Shure mixer, the 5-channel Shure mixer with the 4 channels of A or B and 1 channel of A and B. And so it was pretty much 2, lefts, 2 rights, and a solo channel. And I would mix on headphones to an Ampex 440, load it back in the car, take the tapes home, edit the good takes from the notes I took, take them to the mastering plant, and meet the guy with the equipment at the next church. We did that for a couple of months, every time this season, and we would turn these records around so fast that these guys would sell records. They made money for their school. This fella that I was working for did very well as well. And it was an incredible experience out there. I was able to learn not only how to deal with choirs of different magnitudes and enclaves of different magnitudes, but when they'd include a pipe organ and how you deal with that, and if they had a brass choir and how you mix that, and moving people positions as a component of mixing as opposed to moving mics and stuff, because you're in a fixed environment, so you've got to create the proportions somehow. And so that was a great school for me there. In addition to that, I was working at tape factory called Tono Tapes. They were a tape duplication factory. And so they duplicated cassettes, lots of cassettes. And they had they had an 8-track duplicator, and they had a reel-to-reel duplicator. It was 30 in 2 rows on a what do they call it, camshaft or whatever, Ampex 300s. So imagine 30. You ever seen an Ampex 300? It's bigger than this podium. It's a 1/4-inch tape recorder. It's like this podium, but maybe this tall here. And we were doing tapes. We were replicating tapes of tone. No pun intended with the tonal tapes. But these tapes of tone were to trigger. One of their big clients was AT&T, and they were to produce tapes that triggered the relays in their testing whatever. And so, as you know, tapes have to be on speed in order to make a tone sort of what it's supposed to be. And, you know, out of 30 on a run, we would get 4 that would QC properly, but never from the same tape recorders. I mean, it was just the kookiest thing, but that's sort of, you know, I got that in my background. But after that, I got a job at Chess Records. And this was the Chess Records that was on 320 East 21st Street, or Termar, the studio they moved to in '68. And so it was a 3-room facility, a big room, a medium-sized room, and a small room. Only the big room was operating. It had a Telefunken console, not a Neumann, but a Telefunken console. It had, I think they were silicone transistors that were always, you know, like in some kind of erodive state in breaking down. And so Malcolm acquired 10 Uri pre's from one of the studios that wasn't working, the Uri tube pre's, and we put them in series in front of the mic pre's that were from the Telefunken, turned those pre's to line level, and, you know, created a whole hybrid board out of this thing. It was an amazing thing he did. We had a 3M tape recorder for them, and that was a tape recorder that did have auto input. So by then you could punch in, and it was at that time I figured out that if you could get your band to punch in a mistake rather than to rely on editing later and trying to pick up, it might be a better call, because, you know, while I was a decent tape editor, the cut on 2-inch is always very long, and so it'd have to be a precise cut. Otherwise, if you recorded over it, you could get a pop or a click or something like that. So I could do it, but it wasn't my favorite thing to do. But I did find that if you were a band and you had a point where you loved it, and then, you know, you wanted to pick it up from that point, if I rolled back and had you play along, then I could probably punch in, and many times was able to, and you'd be at the same tempo, and mildly even in the same vibe of where you might have been, and you could continue on, and I wouldn't have to cut tape, and we'd know immediately if it worked or not. And you know, I began to kind of explore that and do that there. They had a great collection of mics, a great collection of tube and ribbon mics there as well. Golly, and I learned to master there, disc mastering. So that was a good skill to learn, because it helped get me in touch with what phase was all about in terms of recording, and how important it is to have your stuff be mono compatible, or, you know, certainly it sounds like stereo, but when it collapses to mono, have not a lot of cancellation, because it's those cancellations that cause the cutter head to, you know, narrow and your record to skip, or you'd have to have a softer record, and we all know that louder is better, isn't it? Right. And, you know, there's nobody in the jukebox turning the stuff up and down going, no, it's the same. Trust me. So, and to this day, you know, we're still in the loud wars. Everybody is talking about they're backing off the loud wars, but, you know, we want our stuff. I want my stuff to be louder than yours, for sure. And I don't always achieve it, but, you know, I still do CD mastering, and, you know, while I'm not the loudest mastering guy, you know, I'm loud, and I'm happy with that. I don't have to kill it. Let me go back to my notes here. So I know I talked a little about sales, and I talked a little about the vibe of the musicians in terms of the punch-ins, but the thing that intrigued me the most was that I always viewed what I was doing as anthropology, because I felt that I was in a position of capturing a moment in time with people who were playing instruments. And it was intriguing to me because, you know, especially when you see guys, the same guys day after day doing commercials, and you see what kind of mood they're in on one day versus mood they're in the other, you know, and what's affect, you know, did they have an argument with their wife? Are they, you know, mild indigestion that day? You know, I mean, all the stuff that contributes really. Now back then, because there was so much work, it was esoteric as the thing to view. Now, when sessions are all special occasions, and they all pretty much are, even the commercials now, many guys walk in and say, hey, it's a reunion. And the ability to capture a human moment, a human spirit, and to work and design that component by your setup technique and how you play back and what kind of cue you give people has always been intriguing to me. So one thing I've always told my kids was, you know, if you ask me what I do for a living, I'm a salesman, I'm an anthropologist, and then I'm an audio guy. And so I learned to do all these kinds of things, you know, as I apprenticed and became a first chair and acquired work and didn't acquire work and had success with experiments I was running and had failures, but I didn't tell you. And if you didn't notice, you know, we were okay, you know, because, you know, you try things and some things you want to go back to and other things you're never going to go back to, but it didn't kill your record or your spot or whatever it was. I always tried to put the same effort into a spot as I did to a record. I mean, in a record, you theoretically have a longer sound check. But, you know, if you're clever in a spot, you know, I could get my drum sounds together before the drummer got there if I was early enough and I had my assistant work, you know, playing the drums, and I could pretty much get a piano sound by getting somebody, there was always somebody that played piano. So, you know, I had preset my sounds to the best of my ability, especially the complex ones, prior to people getting there. And so I always felt that most of the spots I did could go on a demo reel this way. And I wasn't too ashamed of going back and going, oh, I rushed this or that. I've been pretty happy with the mixes that I've had from spot to spot. Even when I'm doing stuff that takes, you know, an hour to record, a half hour for your overdubs, and under an hour for mixing. Records, you get more time, but, you know, the budgets being the way they are, you know, how much more time do you really have? And now with digital, it's slower, it's faster. You know, it takes longer to, in digital, it takes longer to sort of set your processing up, but once it's set up, you can kite it from section to section easily. So it does help that way. And let's see, so from chess, I went to, I did a short stint at a studio called Paul Serrano. And the first day of that work experience, I met the fellow that ran Curtis Mayfield's studio. And about 6 weeks later, they called me, and I wound up working for Curtis for about 5 years. We did a lot of great records there. Aretha Franklin records, certainly Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. We did Natalie Cole there. And it was a great record atmosphere, and it was different from anything else I had done because it was, you know, not spots every day. Although at Chess we didn't do spots every day either. I wound up going back to a studio called Streeterville, where I did do spots every day again, and records at night. And, you know, well, by then, that studio had a couple of Neves, so I was already getting into the finer board category, and they had a couple. They had two Neves and an SSL. So these were in the '80s the highest level of manufactured console that you could get, and the automation was really good on the Neve, the flying faders. The SSL, it had a couple of quirks to it, but once you understood those quirks, the automation was very good. They had something called Total Recall, which never worked. It would get you close, but I was always more comfortable just starting over. I could get you closer starting over than getting that cursor just wiggled in just right, because the play on the cursor was whatever it was. And so, but once you automated, these boards, your mixes started getting at a higher and higher level of what you wanted to do with your mix without editing section by section. That was the other way you used to do it back without automation, is you get your section right, you get that, then you'd reset the next section, you'd cross over, you create an edit at that point, and you had your different textures going that way. So, there's always been a lot of ways to skin a cat. I worked at Streeterville for a year, and then I had an opportunity to run a studio in Winnetka called Red Label. And this was a studio that a fellow who ran the Jovan perfume company had built in the basement of his mansion for his wife's career. He had been spending money every year making a record for her. She was a model and a singer. But he decided to spend the money that year in a facility. I got the job. I did the record for the wife, and then I had clients. So I brought clients in, and we ran it like a regular, just like downtown studio. I did Jovan commercials there with Kenny Rogers. We did the Super Bowl Shuffle there. And a bunch of disco records and stuff like that. So that was a fun job. That was a Harrison board. So that was like an MCI. The fellow that built the studio was a Nashville style kind of guy. So they were into the Harrison boards there, and the pressed fiberglass acoustic method of deadening your studio. I wasn't a big proponent of that either. I found that the pressed fiberglass doesn't really absorb as much as it reflects audio waves. There's a bonding agent in there that causes it to press and become uniform, and it takes the porosity out of that. And so I find that the reflection is square wavy in sound to me, and I just typically don't like rooms that way. So we ripped out all of that, put in R19, covered it with a porous material and wood, slats, and I was able to do big band. In fact, the very first big band I did down in that room. It was a tiny little room, but guys in the band convinced me that I could do this session in there. And from that session, I started getting more and more big bands. After my 3 years at Red Label, I left right after the Super Bowl Shuffle. I went back to Streeterville for about 4 or 5 years, did more commercials until about the mid-'90s, when you couldn't really be on staff anymore and make like an adult living. So I wound up doing the freelance thing as much as I could, but I was able to get into TV. And I began by mixing news at ABC. At ABC, they asked me if I wanted to train to do some post-production, because they had a post-production guy they wanted to relieve. They liked my post-production work enough that I only am the one they asked to come and take over for him on his vacation. And the other times where he's doing a parade or he's doing this, I cover his job. Additionally, I get about 30 weeks a year at CBS doing this very same work, audio post-production and sound design. We do the commercials for the Now You See This Tonight on, this investigative report, or watch our weather, or, our image guys are better than, whatever. We do the audio for that kind of stuff. We do the opens. When they bring in, like problematic audio, we could sometimes help them with that for presentation on the news and the like. The news mixing in audio is now automated pretty much on all TV. So the directors automate the audio based on the camera call, pretty much, is the way I understand it. So I'm just doing audio post now in TV and whatever CDs that I can find to work on. Which brings me to stage 2 of what I want to talk to you about. So, I do all sorts of stuff, and I love recording. I have a control room at home that is tied to our surround theater that we built for the boys. And my wife said, this is not a studio, Fred, and I agreed, thinking all along it was a control room. And I got a Pro Tools LE, and I started goofing around with that at home. I wanted to improve my chops on the Pro Tools anyway, but these speakers really translate. I began doing work that was starting to earn some dough, and I began to put it back into the system, and now I have an HD, a Mac Pro Tools HD. I'm on 11 system. I do stereo mixing for music stuff. I do mastering as well, CD mastering. My mastering effort is sort of models the Bob Ludwig stuff, which is where you get above digital zero with a D to A converter as opposed to squeezing your level up, limiting your level up. I'm actually able to get above digital zero before distortion, and then back off a little, and that's how you do loud records with dynamics, CDs. I also do surround mixing for some nature films. I've got 4 fly fishing videos that I've DVDs that I've done stereo and surround mixes for. It's fun. The thing goes right over your head when he's casting, and he's back here and talking to you up here, and the fish is out there, and it's fun. So I'm still having a great time in audio. Other than the control room, I have a mic collection. It's about 26 mics deep of a small variety of condensers and dynamics. And now I own 13 KSM 313s. I replaced my vintage RCA collection with these things. I had 10. I still got the BK5, but I had 244s and 777s, and that was, for my big band work. This way, I wouldn't have to rely on any studio to have a set of mics that I wanted to use for big band. I could bring my own. The ribbons were in great shape. I always kept them, I kept the dents out. I did a good job. I was always about 3 mics short. Because it's 4 trumpets, 4 bones, and 5 reeds. That's 13. Somewhat I'm getting ahead of myself, but I had an opportunity to unload this set, and I had looked at all the other ribbons except the Shure ribbon, and I would have never moved these mics out, but I looked at the Shure ribbon, and it was warm but brighter. It has other advantages over the RCAs. The RCAs are a wonderfully warm mic, but they need to be brightened. And no matter how good your ribbons are, how matched are they really going to be? I've actually had some come back with a new ribbon that I've had to send back because the seating was askance, and so they couldn't take a sound pressure level. Sometimes. I had to, depending on where the collection was, I had to, accommodate that with the collection. I always make successful recordings, but there was a lot to think about. Ever seen the mic stand go like this, right in the middle of your take? And nobody's got, but these things weigh like a ton. They're big mics. I've had a lot of reflection, and I realized that, I'm a figure 8 guy. One of the things the first thing I play for you, I'm going to play a couple of things for you. The first thing I play for you is a big band that's entirely done in figure 8. So not only were the RCAs all in figure 8, I found that I used the 77s in figure 8. They matched the 44s better, and they were 6 dB louder. The figure 8 and the ribbon are a great texture for a microphone. And upon reflection, I found, I've used them on piano. I can't really use them on piano because they're too low in output and they expose that noise. But they're great sounding piano mics. They're really good acoustic guitar mics, especially on gut string. But they're so low in output that, again, you can't use them for this. And so I've been beginning to wonder if some of my first choice mics were really second choice mics, and I would have used that ribbon if it had a hotter output. So now I looked at all the other ribbons, and I find that I like mics that blend. If I use a mic and it isn't blending with whatever I'm using, I'm not going back to that mic. Now, for any given instrument, I might have 5, 6 mics deep that I can pick from any studio's inventory and get a blend that I want. But if there's one mic that doesn't do that, I won't choose that mic if I know it. And that's sort of how my criterion for mic choice. And I've got a wide exposure to microphones. I've used almost every kind of mic there is. And this is why I own the ribbon collection as opposed to a tube condenser collection, because for horns especially, the ribbons provide the right texture. They handle the transient well, and to me, that was the sound. The Shure mic is a mic that blends. It has warmth, but it has high end, and the high end does not take away from the warmth of the mic. So I found that because I have used this mic now, I have done an entire big band session with this mic, and I found that the texture was great, especially with 13 of the same mic now. It's not like I'm trying to blend different styles of the same mic. This was 13 matched models, and the phase shows that when you're in a multi-mic situation, you're always conscious of your phase factor, and this really helped that. They're over twice as loud, so they're over half as noisy. And now, I haven't done it yet, but I can't wait to try them on piano and acoustic guitar and all these things that I've been not using ribbons on for years because I just couldn't get the output. So, when it came time to look at my RCA collection and start thinking about, I want to start looking at the ribbons and all the stuff, I made this change and I acquired 13 Shure mics. We've used them on a big band session already, and which I'm just finished one mix on it for this presentation. So I'm going to show you some pictures and play you some tunes from each studio. I don't want to sound like I'm putting anything down. I have done successful recordings with both sets of mics. And so I'm just looking forward to more versatility. But, I'm not going to be playing stuff with the RCAs and going, oh, shucks, at all. The first session I want to play, can I show a picture first? I apologize for these pictures. Many of them are iPhones. And, they're terrible. But this is CRC's middle room. I don't know if anybody's been in CRC, but it's pretty much the control room looks out on 3 separate rooms. A very live room, a room in the middle that's kind of narrow, but of medium ambience, and a dead room. So this is the middle room where I stuffed all the horns and the drums. Yes?
Where's CRC? Where's that located?
Chicago, thank you. Chicago Recording Company, 232 East Ohio.
Thank you.
Excellent. This is the saxophone row, and you can see a 77 there. The mic at the end is a CAD 350. That was my baritone mic. The mic in the foreground is a BK5. That was Alto 2. And then the other 2 mics that you can't kind of see are Sony C37s. They are as close of a condenser mic to a 77 as I've ever heard. So that was how that worked. There you can see that I've blocked the window reflection some because I had to put the trombones right on that window. And what I'm doing with this big band kind of is instead of doing the rows thing, you know, like you see a big band set up, I'm working them in a U. The reason I'm doing this is it helps work the acoustics of the studio more. Back when I started, the musicians didn't really care where you put them. I mean, they may have, but they never said a word about it. And so when you did double rows of or 4 trumpets with 2 and 2, 4 bones the same way, 5 reeds because of space and conductor viewpoint need, you know, you had to learn to condense things, and they had to learn to play as good as they could play in these various configurations. I did a lot of big band sessions where I accommodated the rows thing, but of course when you have the trumpets in the back, and no studio is going to provide you with risers, then they're blowing right into the trombone and saxophone mic. So you're going to get a little looser, more leakage kind of thing that way. This way, in a U, you know, they're perpendicular to the trombones and the saxes. And what I discovered is that enables me to do a 5 mic room mic configuration right down the center, where I use on the end positions 2 figure 8s and a cardioid midside to pick up, you know, pretty much the long row of perpendicular horns and reeds, and the cardioid mic picks up the trumpets and the drums, and then I have a dead center of that, I have an omni. So now I have 2 mid-side positions and an omni that's kind of mathed out in the middle of this horn section, and I found it to be a very powerful and phase coupling addition to my ambience. So I can use 10-20% of this mic configuration and open the entire sound up without it being over loose. So that's what I discovered here at CRC in this narrow cavity. There's a piano miking that's at the cross. That's a Sony C500, and those are 2 AKG C12As, which are like 2 414s. It's hard to see, but this is from the trumpet row, and that side is the saxes. But you see a couple 44s there, and here's the other side of the trumpet, so I use 2 77s there. And you can see pretty much it's a tight little space. Yes?
Laser pointer, please.
Laser pointer. Really? I thought this was just a thing. Well, why don't we play that first tune, and you can see what came out of this. It's a 9-foot ceiling. You know, that's a live performance these guys did. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. How are you miking the bass?
The bass is, in that case, there was an RE20 on it and I think it was a 47, and a direct box. Cleverly snuck in there. You know, you need the direct box because there are notes that just disappear. Especially when the band is blowing and the note doesn't project in the mic world. But in the direct world, that note will be there. So if you can find a way to meld that in there without destroying that mic sensibility, you know, that pretty much is what I'm trying to do. You're welcome. Thanks for asking. So, but you can kind of see, now that I got this laser pointer, let's see. You see right there, that's a mid-side position right there. See the two, those are 87s probably. And let's see. 77s, these are so out of focus. But you can kind of see the sliding doors are open. You know, I try to keep it as open as possible. Okay, so this is the end of the CRC thing. The next, I did 2 other sessions after this with the sort of same mic configuration and with regard to the ribbons, and a little differences in what I used for drums, but they were the same kind of mics, just different brands, piano, bass, guitar, or whatever, etc. I'm going to show you the one I did second but mixed first. This was done on a concert stage, like a con auditorium kind of concert stage. So here are the 4 trumpet positions, and you can kind of see an 800-seat auditorium like this, empty behind them. This is the row of saxophones, and you can see the seats behind them. This was the Western Michigan University, and they had, coupled to this auditorium, they had their recording studio. So we snaked out of the control room and used the stage rather than the studio, because the studio was not big enough. But they had a number of baffles, and we pulled those down onto the stage and incorporated that into the setup. That was the bass. This is the actual vocalist, but that's what this next session looked like. So you can see the baffling right in the middle is where I had the drums. You can see where the piano is, and you can kind of see I've got a semicircle of horns with a row of room mics down the center. In this case, I also had a mic in the right about there that I incorporated in the room as well. I'm so sorry for these pictures. They're terrible. But you can kind of see what we were doing here. This is the row of bones. And that's for the next set. So would you play the second that one? You know, they're a good band. You can tell they're not quite the quality of the other band in terms of assurance and power and that kind of thing, but they're pretty good. And I only mention that because it factors into everything we recording people do. If it's not honestly on this part of, on this side of things, there's a limited amount of stuff we can do to rectify that. So pretty much a performance like this lives on its own. And, they did a really good job. I mean, and also I wanted to point out that this one was mixed at my control room, my boutique control room, and the other one was mixed at CRC. So, they're both professional sounding records, that's for sure. Prior to that, I had done a thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the main stage here in town. So the main stage has a wonderful 48-track recording system. Quiet, TC Furlong put it in. I mean, this is as quiet a system as I've ever heard. And I'd had a bunch of opportunities to record some shows there, and I became familiar with the Enclave as a recording environment. Because of the 32-foot ceilings that they have, it's a pretty darn good environment, even a little bigger sounding than this, which is why I play it third. But the stage was a little small. So what we did is, if you know the Enclave, it's about a 300-seat area, with oval tables. We cleared that area, and I used the floor space for the room setup. And again, I was able to use that perpendicular U-shaped horn setup with the 5 mics down the center, drums and rhythm on one end. And in this case, I had the singer behind the trumpets. And in this case, we used stage monitors instead of headphones. It was a budgetary thing, but I've wanted to do this for a while anyway, as I find the headphone thing, especially with horn players, is rough. As soon as the horn player starts blowing, he's closing off his ear, so he can't hear the headphones, and you can't get them loud enough for the guy to hear, except when the playback's on. Then they're too loud to wear. So go figure. I'm not. So when you talk about the anthropology of this thing, I mean, how do I overcome that for you and give you, the musician, an opportunity to do your very best stuff? I search in every session I do for the optimum way to do that wherever I am. But I did notice that a lot during my career at Streeterville, that once, formerly big studios had 2 pretty good playback systems, one in the control room and one out in the studio. And there were hung speakers like this, and you turn them on for a playback and the guys could hear themselves. So the game I played was, how hot can I get these speakers before they feed back? It was a game I always played with the assistants, because they always were reticent to, no, leave them on. Let's see how far they can go, because they were afraid of the feedback. But in general, they never fed back. And a lot of times, I won't kid you, I forgot to turn them off. So we'd do the next take with the speakers on. And the separation wouldn't change. The fundamental characteristic wouldn't change. And, in a funny way, there's a little more air to it. I began using it as a technique. So when I got to this, I was not afraid to do stage monitors, because I already knew that as long as they weren't feeding back, they weren't going to cause me any louder leakage than the drums were going to cause me in the first place. So additionally to this wonderful 48-track system, they had about 3 mics I'd use. Not really. They had a number of mics, but really not a lot. Mostly PA. I mean, the best mics they had were SM81s, and those were all hanging. So the day I needed them, I had to get them off the ceiling from hanging. I don't know why they're hanging there, but somebody must use them. But at any rate, so I assembled. I had my ribbon, and you're going to sort of see a picture of my collection. So I had my collection, and I had the opportunity to rent supplemental mics, so I didn't have to. I mean, I rented the best supplemental mics I could find. I also had to get 20 mic stands. I also had to get snakes. I also had to get 35 extra cables. I mean, I could have had a truck come in, to tell you the truth. But, I liked their system, and it was and it was quiet and everything, so we adjusted to it. And so let me show you a couple pictures from this. This is the rental mic side. A couple of 414s, a couple of 450, 452s, 2 KM86s. Know those? They're a great sounding FET mic. Those are 2-side address Josephsons, and a Josephson C20A, one of 20 on Earth. They're a dual capsule Omni, mono. I don't know. But this is what I've been told. And I understand it intrinsically, but, again, I'm not that technical. I can operate the technical gear. I understand, pattern shape and how all that works and stuff. By the way, did that first thing I played back sound especially loose or anything? I mean, that was all figure eight. Everything was figure eight. The tom mics were figure eight. The piano mics were figure eight. Everything I had on that first record was a figure eight. I just felt like it. Second record, not so much. The second record had, for piano, I had cardioid only mics in there. So there was no figure eight opportunity. Because of the size of the auditorium, I chickened out of the figure eight on the tom mode and stuff. This thing here, pretty much the same. I take that back. I ran the piano in figure eight. I ran the horns in figure eight, of course, and I didn't run the drums in any drum in figure eight. So that's the rental side. This was my side. There's a 677s, a couple of 44s and a 77. That CAD mic, the two Sonys, the SM81s. You see, I got a couple of 556s I try to use whenever I can. They're great conga mics. A couple, like an EV, a couple of SE electronics. It's a nice little variety, a bunch of direct boxes, and this is what my mixing area looks like. It's a 61-inch DLP with master and type speakers, but they work for me. This is when I had the laptop. Now in that cavity, I've got the Mac Pro, and it snakes out to that area, but I sit right dead center of it. It's a fun environment to mix in. I built this vocal booth for that session. That's that M49. Here is the way it looks. So if you know the main stage, you can see how I use the floor space. If you can see how I built baffles there, those were their tables, inverted one on top of another, and I rented stage a velour curtain and created baffling. So I got it over the piano. I created something behind the drums and in front of the stage. I created an area for the guitar and the bass. There's the piano. You can see the open side. You can see the mics are right there. You can see the wedges. The mid-side positions and the Omni up here. There's other pictures of it. Let's see. I rented those plastic things for round of drums. I figured that couldn't hurt. But you see, no rugs. So on the drums, I got a rubber mat, but I don't like the rugs. There's the same material I used to block at CRC. I have this, and I have the couple of tube traps. So I built a little vocal booth. That's a view of the stage where we did wind up using strings. We had strings as a component to the session as well. You see the drummer down there, the piano guy standing up. Here's the World War II shot of the same stuff. The saxophone section. Here's the guitar. I was going to go direct in a mic, and I hated the direct sound, so I stuck another mic on there, and wait to hear this guitar sound. So you get a sense, and there she is singing, right there. This woman is a terrific singer. She had the guts to work live and accept what she did, and she was amazing. These guys are amazing too. This is the Chicago Jazz Orchestra, but this is how we did this, and then we had the strings on stage. Let's see, there's the trumpet configuration. But you can see, I've got to stand these things straight up because if I tip them at all, over they're going. And, I got them backed up, real juicy like. Same with the bones. So will you play this? Art shot, there she is. Sax section, and then I get ahead of myself. So.
The leaves of brown came falling down, remember that September in the rain. The sun went out just like a dying ember that September in the rain. To every word of love I heard you whisper, the raindrops seemed to play a sweet refrain.
Thanks. These guys were awesome. This band performs at Andy's Monday night, this year pretty regularly from the summer every Monday night through the end of the year. So they're pretty tight. And then the singer is extraordinary. And this was a wonderful, 10-song CD that we made. You can see the fellow I'm working for in this record didn't like as much echo as the fellow I was working for the last, everybody's got an opinion for me, and it's my job to really turn it into a professional sound regardless of my opinion because, I'm working for them. So this is also a good example of that. I listen to it and I go, oh yeah, this says this and this says that and all the stuff. Go ahead.
Did you add reverb for the first recording?
Yes. Yes, in a way, it almost has the most reverb I've added, even though the second recording sounds more reverby. But that studio, the first studio, is the smallest enclave, the shortest ceiling. So maybe that has something to do with it. But yes, but I try to be clear. I try not to be overt with it. It's a dynamic reverb. So when the holes happen, the reverb is very clever about going away in the same dynamic as the carry of the actual instruments. I do try to pay attention to doing that. So with this record here, it's got a very natural sound to it. It is a wonderful performance, and I love doing live records. I mean, it's a lot harder, but I think it shows in the music. Each of these records is a performance record in its own right. So the fourth example I have is now where I rolled the mic collection over. And I had an opportunity to do a big band that's a little different from the three bands you're hearing here. This is a more modern sound than big band. The term we used to use was avant-garde, but this has kind of got a fusion-esque bottom. They use Fender Rhodes and electric guitar instead of any kind of Freddie Green comp and acoustic or acoustic piano. Their horn voicings are a little different. They're a little atypical. Where the voicings sort of square up, you'll hear where it becomes like something you're familiar with versus something that's provocative to your ear kind of thing. But this is the kind of project this was. And in hindsight, I think the switch on the mics was actually at the perfect time for this because the subtleties of the inside of this music are revealed wonderfully with the new mic collection. So let me show you some pictures of this. That's the saxophone row. And again, I did it in the same configuration with the drums at one end and the horns going down the sides and the trumpets going perpendicular. This is the trombone row, but you can kind of see there they are, and they're all the same. We spend our lives as engineers looking for the right different mic for every little thing, and suddenly it's like I got this collection of the same mics, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the same mic does on every different thing. It's just as valid a concept. So there's my mid-side positions. This room here is a plaster parallel wall room with the equivalent of pillows on the walls. It has a tremendous room tone. I did a lot of work there about 10 or 12 years ago, and they still have a number of baffles that I had them build for my use. And so I lined the walls with them, and I'm able to take the tone back somewhat. But you can see the extra baffling in addition to their wall baffling. This is the drum booth facing the control window, and you can see on the left the hazy trombone row. They're the saxophone row. You can see me, but behind me is the band leader. He's a trombone player. You might see a KSM in front of him. He soloed right in front of the drums. The drums are right behind him. There's your trumpet row. Bass bone guy. Other bone guy. There's the drummer. It's one overhead. It's all I ever use. I think I got plenty of cymbals. There's that other mid-side position. I don't know if I got a shot of the Omni. But it's a KSM 32 and a 353. It's a cool combination. I'd never used that before, but the guys helped me out. Here's a good way of looking at the room. This was sort of the only way in, but you see the trumpets, you know, I mean, you can kind of see the depth of the room. It's a nice sized room. There I am with my new collection. I'll show you that later. We played it last tune. Thank you. So, different but similar. You know, I think the idiom itself causes it to have the most differential, but, you know, I love the horn sound on this thing. And the articulation, especially in the fast notes, is very, very good. I mean, there's a lot about it that I could begin to point out, but, you know, it enables me to move forward in my effort, knowing that I'm, you know, not standing still either, and trying to keep sensibility together, but explore the future with it. And so, you know, it's a pretty good feeling to have this compliment now, and to demonstrate all this stuff for you. Let's see. I was going to talk about a couple of different aspects of why I am so happy with this, but just the mic's not falling over in the middle of the take. You know, I mean, when you think about the magnets on the old mics, you know, they lose power, they lose fluxivity. You know, how do you charge up a magnet, a fixed magnet, to get more output? I mean, you know, there are liabilities going on here. So I'm a happy camper now. No commercial pun intended. So, questions? Thoughts? Go, please. I'm sorry.
On your piano pieces, how are you able to make them, the piano piece sound so full without getting the percussion sound without hitting the strings? Maybe on your second piece of yours?
You know, I'd been doing piano the same way for about 35 years too. It was pretty much stereo over the hammers, this way, this way, this way. You know, I have always used the mic back by the cross of the piano to lock the center. So, you know, piano, if you've recorded piano, you know that when you're left and right in piano, I'm going to get to the hammer part in a second. When you get to, the left and right together in mono, you get a lot of cancellation on piano. So I've always found that that third mic back by the cross slid into the center just right, locks that center, and so you get no cancellation. I think you'd hear the percussive nature of the hammers hitting the keys. Like it's more demonstrative in the first piano than any of the others, isn't that correct? The reason for that primarily is hardening of the hammers. So commercial places, recording studios used to lacquer the hammer, the felt hammers, and that caused a more tack-like approach and attack to pianos. So The pianos that have the more normal felt don't really exhibit that kind of attack. But when you're competing, because, you know, the audio is all about, you know, a proportionate hearing. And so I'm hearing this against hearing that against hearing this other thing. And it causes me to understand what I'm hearing and blend, etc. I think a lot of that percussion is eaten up by everything else that's going on, because you're never hearing the piano like solo alone by itself. Probably without that percussive quality, you wouldn't hear the piano at all in the thick of things. But the reason I'm saying I recorded them the same way was, so one time at this main stage place, I couldn't get the mic in the way I wanted it. Just wasn't there for me. And so I wound up going in this other way, and the only way I could position a mic was dead 180 out of the other position, and I haven't stopped doing that since. You notice it's got a nice little stereo on it without it being, you know, like the stereo of a synth piano, you know, where it really goes left to right. It's got a nice semblance of left and right now. It's almost like the piano. It's almost like sitting in front of the piano when you hear it, right? The scope of it. Turning that mic around really did that for me. Before, it was more binaural in nature, but with the reverse of capsules, and I was surprised like anybody, because I'm reversing the bottom end, you know, the bottom end of the piano, which is the less percussive part. It should not blend as much because the top end carries more. But it seems to work out really nice, and I love the spread, so I've been doing it like that ever since. I'm sorry, you're.
When you use more of the same mic, do you have to lean on EQ more to differentiate things?
You know, I don't think so. I think what differentiates is the things. You know, am I micing a drum or a saxophone or as an instrument, or am I micing that instrument in the atmosphere I'm in? So am I really micing the atmosphere near the instrument? I don't know, but one thing I wanted to point out was I love the inside. You know, I like when the drums, when you can hear the splat off the room coming back to you. Sometimes I don't. I kind of knocked it out of the last tune because it didn't sound as cool loose. But the second tune, where it really got drippy in there, I thought it was cool, so I left it. I could have knocked it kind of back and brought it up. I mean, you know, I got automation, but, you know, in the natural dynamic of things, that's really what's happening. So, you know, sometimes you want to let the listener experience that too. Yes?
On the second piece you showed us, the drummer had a rise cymbal with rivets.
Yes.
And I was curious, I've heard some session like drummers say that like, you can't get that to work when they record with like high frequency content. I was curious if you had an opinion on that.
So you could hear that it had rivets. It was perfectly obvious. I don't think I was having any trouble with that part. He had a well-tuned set. And I think when everything equals out, you know, what is exposed doesn't get eaten up because it is being picked up in a way that is neutral. It gets back to that, you know, am I micing it or am I micing around it? I did a big band session once with Louis Bellson, and we were doing 4 songs with Louis and 4 songs with a guy named, it'll come back to me, but he was a more fusion kind of drummer. Teaches at the U of I now, and his name will come back to me. So Louis Bellson had the double bass drum, you know, LBJ set, you know, with the double kicks and everything, and I mic'd him and I EQ'd it and I did the whole thing, you know, the high tune toms and everything. When we moved his drums out and put the more contemporary rock set of drums in, I put the mics back on, and before I cleared the board to start over, I decided to take a quick listen to see what it sounded like just based on that, and I didn't change a thing. You know, the toms were low, the kicks were tight, you know, everything was like it was supposed to be. And that was when I started first getting onto the fact that maybe I'm micing atmosphere. Maybe it's about the atmosphere. Maybe it's about it, not me. Maybe it's about the same 7 mics on drums, jazz, or the same 7 mics on drums, rock, and it's still one is jazz and one is rock. It's a little like, you know, level and volume are completely different, right? A whisper at 0 VU is still at 0 VU. A scream at 0 VU is still a scream at 0 VU. So, volume and level, not so much. What gives stuff apparent volume that's hotter than other apparent volume? I used to think it was the arrangement, and I still do to a certain extent. I think when you got something that's hot, that's just hot, you can't explain why. I think the arrangement put it there. The key, the instrumentation, whatever. But really, what I'm doing is ancillary to the music. I'm just not screwing it up on the way to tape or the speakers, if possible, Here's another, I got two more provocative things for you. So, did you ever think about air and tape as the same sort of thing? It's the medium that conducts sound. So, you're trying to capture audio and you have a dynamic factor. Air has unlimited ability to handle dynamics, but no ability to capture. Tape had ability to capture, but a limited dynamic range. So, there's a correlation there. Digital, sort of the same as tape, except it has no dampening, no natural analog dampening factor. There's a natural dampening factor to everything analog. And the only thing digital doesn't replicate is how that dampens through the EQ. I mean, it doesn't dampen through the EQ, it doesn't dampen through the compression. Nothing dampens like through digital processing. It doesn't replicate that. The closest it comes is in reverb. Did you ever think about what are we really doing when we're processing? I mean, do you know what you can manipulate in audio? Two things: amplitude and time. And that's it. Because if you think about it, EQ, and you're moving the tones, right? But you're really changing the amplitude of specific frequencies. So, you're, and thereby changing the time by which it hits the monophase point. Because there's a monophase point. So if there's a mean line and you EQ the top end, that part of the line juts out ahead, in theory. So, when they talk about things being moved with phase, or EQ with phase being moved with EQ, that's true. But is it necessarily true that it's out of phase? It takes it out of phase. What if it was out of phase and you're EQing it back in? And then that has nothing to do with tone. That's just how you hear the phase of things. But it does manipulate the tone as you work. Right? Reverb, function of time. Delay, function of time. Compression, function of time versus amplitude. I mean, what is there in audio that you can mess with? That's it. So the various processings are just functions of how you deal with that. Any other questions? Yes.
That last track, where was that recorded? Was that Ivy Lab?
That was Ivy Labs.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it used to be Studio Chicago. And it's pretty much the same. I mean, they cleaned up the board real nice.
Yeah.
And they had the two best assistants I've ever used. So I wanted to say that about them. Those two guys I used at Ivy Labs were paying attention to my work, and I really appreciated it. Nothing is worth for a freelance guy to come in and the guy that's assisting you is just bored. There's just no upside to that. So these guys were totally in, and we had a lot of good energy around that last session between the mics and all the newness based on that, as well as this was a different session and a different type of configuration for these guys. They'd never seen anything like this. So, anything else? Yes.
At what point did you start using your technique for this style of music, where you had two mid-side groups and then another omni mic? When did you start doing that?
It was pretty much on that session that was the first thing I played. Prior to that, I was doing a session where it was, I have a client that likes to build half a big band. So she'll have half the big band, 2 trumpets, 2 bones, and 3 reeds, and then they stack the third and fourth part. So it's not like multi and it doesn't phase, it's 2 different parts. So that's how we build that session. So, I was looking for some way to, enlarge the experience because of the lack of extra mics and I'm using leakage obviously to create, bigness. It's funny, when you think of digital reverb and stuff, aren't we trying to put the standing waves back in the stuff we're taking it out of? So, I try to work with natural standing waves. And I sort of bloomlined that one because it just made sense to bloomline it. But I started thinking right then, the next time I do this, I'm going to do one at each end. Actually, based on this last session, I'm going back to the bloomline the next time I do it, which is 2 figure eights. The mid side is 1 cardioid, 1 figure 8. And then you take the figure 8 side, you mult it, dump it 6 dB so that it's equal to what it was when it was just 1 track, spread it, and then find which one, you find the out of phase figure 8 side, and throw it back in phase, and then you have a very nice wide kind of experience. So the fact that I had 2 of them, the one I thought, well, the first 3 have that pretty well. The third one, the fourth one, I actually wound up liking it left, right, opposites. So I never mid-sided, and that's why I know I'm going to the bloomline next time. It'll work. So whether I like the experiment or not, I'm trying it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.